The thing they never tell you about true solitude, the kind you find deep in the backcountry, is how loud the silence can be. It's not an absence of sound, but a chorus of it. The sigh of the wind through a million pine needles, the creak of ancient boughs, the skittering of unseen things in the undergrowth. It's a language you have to learn, and after 3 days alone on the Black Ridge Trail, I was starting to feel fluent. I felt like I could hear the mountain breathing. It was a comforting thought, right up until the moment I realized the mountain was listening back. It was on my final descent, with the afternoon sun dappling the path ahead, that I saw it. A glint of black and silver, half buried in a bed of damp moss and decaying leaves just off the trail. My first thought was litter, some careless hiker's discarded trash, and a flare of annoyance went through me. But as I nudged it with my boot, I saw it was a high-end action camera, the kind with a rugged, waterproof housing. It was caked in dirt, but otherwise looked intact. An expensive piece of kit to just lose. I picked it up, wiping the grime from the screen with my thumb. The battery icon impossibly showed a sliver of red. It was still on, in record mode, as if it had been waiting. There was no branding, no "if found, please contact" sticker. Just a matte black rectangle, still and heavy in my palm. It felt like finding a tombstone. My rational mind argued that someone had simply dropped it, that they'd be retracing their steps, frantic to find it. But the deeper, more primal part of me, the part that had been listening to the forest whispers for 3 days, felt a cold trickle of unease. The placement was too deliberate, nestled in that mossy cradle, not dropped, but almost presented. I told myself I'd check the footage for any clues, an identity, a license plate, anything to get it back to its owner. That's what I told myself. But the truth was, my curiosity was a physical itch. I slipped the camera into my pack and finished the hike, the weight of it feeling significantly heavier than its few ounces. My apartment was a stark contrast to the living world of the forest, sterile, silent, and smelling of dust and loneliness. I dumped my pack by the door, the camera landing on my kitchen table with a definitive thud. I charged it, the little red light blinking like a steady, accusing eye. While it drank power, I made coffee, the normalcy of the ritual doing little to settle the low hum of anticipation in my veins. Once the battery icon glowed a healthy green, I disconnected it and connected it to my laptop. The device registered as a generic storage drive. There was only one file on it. A single video file over 8 hours long, timestamped from just 2 nights ago. The file name was just a string of numbers, but someone had also titled it Final Ascent. My finger hovered over the mouse button. This was it, the moment of intrusion. I clicked play. The video quality was stunning, crystal clear in that wide-angle, slightly curved perspective of a high-end lens. The first hour was exactly what you'd expect. A point-of-view shot from the camera, presumably mounted on someone's head or chest. I saw the backs of hiking boots on a trail, heard the sound of heavy breathing and jovial, slightly breathless conversation. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman. Their voices were young, energetic, full of the excited tension of a weekend adventure. I saw glimpses of their faces when they turned to check on each other. Alex, a guy with a scruffy beard and a warm laugh. Maya, whose dark hair was tied back in a messy but practical braid. And the one whose perspective this was, who the others called Ben. They were ordinary, happy. They joked about their pack weight, about who would snore loudest, about whether they'd actually be able to start a fire. It was so profoundly normal, it was almost boring. I found myself fast-forwarding, scanning through the hike, the setting up of camp in a small, picturesque clearing surrounded by tall pines. As dusk began to bleed into the sky, turning it a deep, bruised purple, Ben must have taken the camera off. He propped it on a log, angling it to capture the campsite. They cooked dehydrated meals, passed a flask around, their laughter becoming more relaxed, more intimate as the fire crackled and spat sparks into the encroaching darkness. The camera's audio picked it all up with unsettling clarity. The pop of the fire, the chirping of the first crickets, the low murmur of their voices. This was the footage of people who had no idea it was their last night alive. The knowledge was a lead weight in my stomach. Eventually, they zipped themselves into a sturdy-looking 3-person tent. Ben, it seemed, had decided to leave the camera running outside, perhaps to capture the night sounds, or maybe just forgetting to turn it off. The video showed the silent, dark campsite, illuminated only by the faint dying glow of the embers and the cool light of a half moon. The audio became the star. The wind picked up, a low, gentle moan as it filtered through the trees. Leaves rustled. Somewhere an owl called out, a hollow, lonely sound. I was watching this, lulled by the monotony, when the first anomaly happened. It was so subtle I almost missed it. The wind gusted, creating a long, sighing rush of sound. But a fraction of a second after the real wind died down, it came again. An echo, except it wasn't a perfect echo. It was the same pitch, the same duration, but it felt separate, manufactured. It was the acoustic equivalent of a shadow detaching itself from its owner and moving independently. I sat up straighter, my coffee gone cold. I rewound and listened again. There it was. A sigh that wasn't the wind. My heart was starting to beat a little faster. On screen, nothing moved. The tent was a silent, dark dome. The next event was more pronounced. Maya, inside the tent, coughed in her sleep. A dry, sleepy little cough. A moment of silence. Then from the tree line, just beyond the circle of firelight, the cough repeated. Perfectly. It was her cough, down to the slight rasp at the end. But it was directionally wrong. It came from outside. From the dark. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, began to spread through my chest. This was no longer a lost recording. This was a snuff film, a document of a predation. Inside the tent, a voice muffled by nylon whispered. It was Alex. I couldn't make out the words, but he sounded sleepy, confused. He'd heard it. He'd heard his girlfriend's cough come from the wrong side of the tent wall. Silence for a long, terrifying minute. Then, the thing in the woods mimicked Alex's sleepy mumble. It didn't use words, just the exact cadence, the same timbre of his voice, a low, questioning grumble. It was a sound that said, huh, but it was empty of any human meaning. It was a lure. The tent zippers shuddered open. A sliver of light from a headlamp cut through the darkness. Alex's face appeared, bleary-eyed and squinting. He was looking directly towards the tree line, towards the source of the sound. Don't! I wanted to scream at the screen. Don't you hear it? Don't you hear that it's not right? He called out, his voice a hoarse whisper. Maya? You out here? From the darkness, just a few yards away, her voice answered. Yeah, over here. I thought I heard something. It was perfect. It was her exact vocal fry, the slight upward inflection she used when she was anxious. But it was wrong. It was devoid of the warmth, the soul that had been there hours before. It was a recording. A flawless, terrifying recording. What are you doing? Alex whispered, and he began to crawl out of the tent. He stood up, shining his headlamp beam towards the trees. The light danced over trunks and branches, creating shifting, monstrous shadows. Nothing moved. Then the thing used his own voice against him. From a different direction behind him now, it mimicked his own whisper. What are you doing? Alex spun around, his light sweeping wildly. Hello? The fear was evident in his voice now. I see a spell now, sharp and metallic. The thing didn't answer with words. It answered with the sound of Maya crying. A soft, scared, sniffing cry. It was heart-wrenchingly genuine. It was the sound of a frightened young woman. It came from his left now. Alex turned towards it, taking a hesitant step away from the safety of the tent. Maya, are you hurt? Talk to me. The crying stopped. And then it mimicked the sound of his own frantic breathing, the panicked puff of air he'd just let out. It was closer now, much closer. The camera's audio, so sensitive, picked up a new sound underneath it all. A soft shifting noise, like dry leaves being deliberately stirred. Like something moving with infinite patience, brushing against the forest floor. It wasn't the wind. This had weight, purpose. Alex must have heard it too. He froze, his headlamp beam fixed on a dense thicket of ferns. The beam began to shake. He was trembling. And then the thing in the woods gave up on subtlety. It screamed. It was Maya's scream. The scream from earlier that day when she'd almost slipped on a wet rock. A scream of sudden, genuine shock that had turned into laughter. But now there was no laughter. It was raw, primal terror, ripped from a human throat and played back on a speaker made of nightmare. It erupted from the thicket, impossibly loud, shattering the night's silence. Alex didn't hesitate. He screamed her name and ran towards the sound, his headlamp beam jolting violently, illuminating a chaotic strobe of ground, ferns, and tree trunks. The camera, static on its log, captured it all. The sound of his crashing progress through the undergrowth. And then the sound cut off. Not a scream, not a struggle. It was just gone. One moment he was there, crashing through the woods. The next, there was only the wind and the rustling leaves. And that other, softer, shifting sound. The sound of something dragging a heavy weight away over dry ground. I was gripping the edge of my desk, my knuckles white. My own breathing was shallow. The video kept playing. The silent, moonlit campsite. The empty tent, its doors still gaping open. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The tent zipper moved again. Ben's face appeared this time, pale and terrified. "Alex?" he whispered into the darkness. "Maya? Guys, this isn't funny." The forest was silent. It had gotten what it wanted from Alex. It was studying the new source of sound. It was learning Ben. It started with his own whisper. It played his "guys, this isn't funny" back to him, but from 3 different points around the clearing, in rapid succession, like a sonic ping pong ball. Ben flinched with each one, his eyes wide with a confusion so deep it was a form of madness. Then it used Maya's voice again. "Ben, help me. My ankle, I think it's broken." It was so close it sounded like it was right next to the camera. Ben, crying now, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face, stumbled out of the tent. He was smarter. He didn't run. He backed away towards the fire pit, holding a trekking pole like a weapon. "What are you?" he sobbed. "Leave us alone." The thing mimicked his sob. Then it mimicked the sound of the trekking pole clattering against a rock. Then it mimicked the frantic, thumping beat of his own heart, a sound I knew the camera's microphone couldn't possibly have picked up. But it had, and it played it back to him, a loud, rhythmic thump, thump, thump from the trees. Ben broke. He turned and ran, not towards the sounds, but away from them, down the trail they'd come up. The camera captured his fleeing form disappearing into the darkness. His footsteps faded. Silence returned. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing. Just the wind and the leaves. I was about to fast forward again when I saw it. A shape, darker than the surrounding darkness, moved at the edge of the tree line. It didn't walk into the clearing. It unfolded itself from between 2 narrow pine trees. It was impossibly tall and wiry, a mess of elongated, spindly limbs that seemed to move in all the wrong directions. It didn't have a discernible face, just a shadowy, indistinct head that swiveled slowly, taking in the empty campsite. It was made of the forest itself, a nightmare collage of shadow, bark, and fractured moonlight. It took 2 long, shuddering steps into the clearing. Its movement was all wrong. It was the visual equivalent of the mimic sounds, almost natural but horrifyingly off. It paused, its head tilting. And then it made a sound. It replayed the last few minutes. Ben's sobs, Alex's frantic footsteps, Maya's scream. It played them all at once, a cacophony of terror emanating from its core, a twisted trophy it had collected. Then it turned, and it looked directly at the camera. It wasn't a look of curiosity. It was a look of acknowledgement, of recording. It knew. It had always known the camera was there. This was its purpose. This was how it propagated. It took a step towards the lens, then another. The image began to distort, as if its very presence fouled the signal. The screen flickered with static. The audio crackled and popped. The creature leaned in until its formless, dark head filled the entire screen. And then it made one final sound. Not a mimicry. A raw, original sound. A low, wet, grinding rasp, like stone grinding against stone deep underground. The video cut to black. I sat in my silent apartment, staring at the blank screen on my laptop. The only sound was the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs. I felt cold, detached from reality. The normal world of my apartment, with its humming refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, seemed like a fragile painting over a terrifying abyss. I had to move. I stood up, my legs shaky, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn on the tap. I was pouring the water when I heard it. Just the wind. A gentle breeze whispering against the window pane over my sink. I live on the 2nd floor. There's an old oak tree outside. It was just the wind. I set the glass down, the water untouched. The wind gusted again, a little stronger this time, rustling the dry autumn leaves still clinging to the oak's branches. A perfectly normal sound. A sound I'd heard 1,000 times. But a fraction of a second after the real rustle died away, I heard it again. A perfect, separate echo. A rustling that didn't quite sync up with the movement of the branches I could see outside my window. I stopped breathing. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I stood there frozen, a statue of pure dread. And then I heard another sound, a soft, dry, shifting noise, like something moving with infinite patience brushing against the shingled side of my building. It wasn't the wind. This had weight, purpose. My eyes were fixed on the dark window. The world outside was a black void. The thing outside mimicked the sound of my refrigerator clicking off. It mimicked the faint buzz of my laptop charger. It was learning the sounds of my world, my apartment, my life. It was quiet again. I could feel it out there, listening, learning. And then it began to mimic the sound it had been studying most closely, the sound it had been waiting for. It started to mimic the rhythm of my own terrified, shallow breathing. It was perfect. The video ends as I slowly, so slowly, turn my head to look out into the darkness.